Good evening. I am May Gerstel, a member of the Election Forum Committee. We have a very special February election coming up, which very few people know about, so we wanted to inform you about the issues that you will be voting on. You'll be voting very soon. We were just informed today that the ballots were mailed today, and as was the voters' pamphlet, so you should be receiving them in the mail in the next couple days. We have a very unusual and most interesting program this evening. First, you will learn about the two Seattle Public School levies that are up for renewal from 3 Seattle Public School administrators, followed by a 10-minute Q&A. Then we will see a video by the Seattle channel that discusses the ballot measures about funding the social housing proposition. Some of you may be watching at home on HHTV. We welcome you as well. So let's get started. Our 3 speakers from the Seattle Public Schools are, to my left, Dr. Kurt Buttleman, Assistant Superintendent of Finance, the CFO, Richard Best, the Executive Director for Capital Projects, Planning, and Facilities, and Carlos Del Valle, Assistant Superintendent of Technology and Optimization.
Operational, some supplemental operational funding for the school district. The second levy, Proposition 2, is a capital levy, so the buildings, infrastructure, and technology are part of that levy. And we'll get into a lot of detail on both of those throughout this presentation. Seattle Public Schools is the largest school district in the state, serving nearly 50,000 students, and our budget is around $1.23 billion annually for the operations of Seattle Public Schools. 106 schools. Richard will talk a lot about the different buildings and facilities, but there's 106 schools. The budget is $1.23 billion. This levy that's on the ballot currently comprises about 15.6% of that $1.23 billion, or $191 million. So it's the second most significant after state funding in terms of the funding for Seattle Public Schools and those 50,000 students. Here's some of our graduates. A little more detail on the educational and programs and operations levy, or the AP&O levy. Again, it funds the operations. Think about the people that serve in the buildings, serve the kids in those buildings, people like me that serve the kids in those buildings. Some of the things that we're highlighting that it's funding are student safety and support. So this levy helps to fund salaries for security personnel in the buildings, special education specialists and teachers who serve those kids, multilingual support staff for students who are learning English as they're becoming students at Seattle Public Schools. It funds student services and programs such as special education, student meals. The meal program is partially funded by this levy. And then the buses, school buses, are supplemented by this levy. Other things that it funds, some examples, are the athletic programs. So Seattle Public Schools is very proud of its athletic programs. This levy fully funds the athletic programs for Seattle Public Schools. Also funds arts, music, and drama in the schools. I have 3 examples of very specific things, and these are not the only things funded by this levy, but these are sort of examples that resonate with people. Seattle Public Schools employs 73 security personnel throughout our district to serve those 106 schools. The state has a very complicated formula by which they give funding to schools for security specialists, and that formula generates 9.3, the equivalent of the salaries of 9.3 security specialists. So this levy allows Seattle Public Schools to hire those additional 63.7 security specialists to serve the kids and keep the schools safe throughout the 106 school buildings. Special education is also a large part of Seattle Public Schools' budget. It's around $250 million a year. Again, the state has a formula by which they provide funding for that. They provide $150 million to Seattle Public Schools annually on an average year. The levy comprises 74 of that $224 million. So it fills that gap in funding that the state does not provide, so those student needs can be met at our schools. And the third example I alluded to earlier, the state does not provide any funding for athletics in any of the school districts in the state of Washington, so all of the athletic programs are funded by this levy, and the annual budget for that is approximately $5.5 million. So 3 examples of things that are pretty tangible for folks that are funded by this levy that we're discussing, that's up for renewal right now. We get a question often about, we've read in the newspaper, there's financial issues at Seattle Public Schools. Why can't you just raise the amounts you're collecting in levies to help bridge some of that gap? There are restrictions on what school districts can raise. The state has a paramount duty to fully fund basic education. So these levies are considered supplemental, and there's a cap on what districts can raise. The ballot measure is for the full amount of what we are allowed to raise currently by the current laws, plus a little bit more. There's speculation that the legislature may change some of the rules around that sometime in the future, and Seattle Public Schools is trying to be prepared for that eventuality so that they can fully fund their schools more adequately. This levy that I'm talking about is a 3-year levy, so the levy will be, assuming it's passed in February, 3 years from now will be a renewal of this levy will be on the ballot for those 3 years that it would start next year in 2026. It would raise $747 million over the course of those 3 years, so approximately $250 million per year. And for the individual average taxpayer, I looked up on the King County tool in my own home. I'm the average taxpayer on this tool. I'll be paying between 78 and 72 cents per $1,000 of assessed value of my property in Ballard. I'm going to introduce Richard Best, our Executive Director of Capital Projects and Planning, and he's going to talk about the Proposition 2, the capital portion of the levy.
Great. Thank you, Kurt. So as Kurt mentioned, my name's Richard Best. I'm the Executive Director for Seattle Public Schools. I oversee pretty much everything facilities. I just want to take a moment to say this is actually a new elementary school that we were able to deliver in 2023. This is James Baldwin Elementary School. It's formerly known as Northgate Elementary School. It's a 2-story structure, and it holds 650 students when it's at capacity. So the BEC 6 capital levy, as Kurt has mentioned and May has mentioned, is also a replacement levy. BEC 5 was passed in 2019 by the voters of the city of Seattle, within the city of Seattle, and allowed us to build and create additions at 15 schools. We are coming to the completion of BEC 5, having achieved at least having all projects under the construction at this moment in time, or complete, with the one exception that we have put a hold on at this moment in time. But we are coming before the voters really with a focus on safety and security improvements in the BEC 6 capital levy, energy conservation improvements. We're going to be making recommendations to modernize and make additions at 5 schools, and then energy conservation will be a big focus as well. State of Washington passed what they refer to as the Clean Buildings Performance Standards, which is an energy standard that regulates your energy use index. And then the city of Seattle passed legislation which is referred to as the Building Emissions Performance Standards. Again, it's looking at creating buildings that are highly energy efficient. As Kurt mentioned, we have a portfolio of 106 buildings. Our oldest school is BF Day Elementary School, built in 1892. And James Baldwin is actually one of our 3 youngest schools that we delivered in 2023 as part of the BEC 5 capital levy. I'll note that also a big part of our BEX levy is our technology emphasis. This is literally 90% of the funding that goes to our Department of Technology Services, which Carlos will talk about in just a couple of minutes, comes from the BEX levy. So the major renovations, Lowell Elementary School, which is located up here on Capitol Hill, is one of the projects. Plan to have a major renovation and addition. We believe the building at the southeast corner of that school, designed by Edgar Blair in 1917, it was built in 1917, will be landmarked. And so we are going to, we are planning to save that portion of the building, and then we'll be making an addition to that portion of the building and removing the older portions that were built in the 1950s. In addition, we have an elementary school that is to be determined. It's a location. We will go through a process that looks at our elementary schools and what elementary school is really, from a facilities conditions standpoint, from a enrollment growth or enrollment projections standpoint, needs to be replaced. We'll engage in the conversations with the City of Seattle's Office of Planning and Community Development, look at the comprehensive plan that goes, I think it's right before City Council at this moment in time, look at where they're projecting growth. Love to be in a position in which we're being proactive rather than reactive. School districts have historically been reactive to growth, and that's why there's a whole portable industry. And I will note Seattle Public Schools has 249 portables on our 106 school sites. Now that's down from 1970s. We had over 600 portables on our school sites. So then we have an addition plan, a classroom addition plan at Chief South High School, International High School. That is to eliminate 8 portables, and then we're also looking at enhancing the career and technology education program there. We're going to be building some special classrooms in which we can teach construction, we can teach advanced manufacturing, we can teach culinary services, and then we'll be modernizing John Marshall Elementary School, again, a building that we believe will be landmarked. So as part of the safety and security improvements planned for our schools, I'm not going to read the whole list, but I'll highlight just a couple. One of the very important ones is the secure entry lobbies. What we're trying to do with school design today is once school starts, all the perimeter doors get locked. You're forced to come in through the front door, and you don't get access to the school. You enter into a vestibule, the interior doors are locked, and you are actually forced to go into the administration office, register, have a sign-in protocol, and that too is part of our safety and security improvements for the BEC 6 capital levy, is a visitor management system at all 106 schools. Then intercom systems, we're looking at replacing our intercom systems district-wide, except for those schools that were built in BEX 4 and BEX 5. They are at their end of their life. Communication in a crisis event or an emergency event is critical. This will actually allow us to communicate from the John Stanford Center, which is our district administration building located in Soto. And then security systems, fire alarm systems throughout several buildings, not all buildings. And then we're looking at also implementing some accessibility repairs, including elevators, so that our buildings meet accessibility standards. Then building conditions improvements for those who owned a house, which I imagine most did at one time. You need to replace a roof. Roughly you get 30 years on a roof. We have roof replacements planned in the BEC 6 capital levy. You've got to paint your house once every 12 to 15 years. A lot of folks think you don't have to take care of a masonry building. Well, you have to put a water repellent anti-graffiti coating on about every 15 years as well. And so those funds are in this levy. Boilers need to be replaced, electrical services sometimes need to be upgraded because of some of the technology that we're putting in our schools. Our electrical use is far greater than it was in the 1950s and 60s. And so we've got some electrical service upgrades planned. Then play is an important part of our educational program as well. Get kids out at recess, get them to burn off their energy. We have some playground improvements planned as well. And then our central kitchen actually feeds, prepares 50,000 meals on a daily basis. And they send it out to our elementary schools for breakfast and lunch. And so we have some improvements planned at our central kitchen as well. So how are the projects identified? Seattle Public Schools were required at least once every 6 years to implement a facilities condition assessment by OSPI. In the years since 2014, we've actually implemented 3 facilities conditions assessments that helps inform the projects that go on the levy. We then work with a cost estimator to determine what those improvements are going to cost. That money then goes into a levy. We have a board policy that we need to follow in preparation for the levy. We have board guiding principles that we need to follow. We also report to a public oversight committee. So we have a public oversight committee that oversees all of our BEX levies, and Carlos has a public oversight committee. It's called the Information Technology Advisory Committee that oversees the implementation of all the technology portions in the BEX and BTA levies. We went to the school board with the initial proposal on October 19th. They approved it on November 19th, and now this is the measure that is on the ballot. So with that, Carlos.
Hi, Carlos de Valle. Again, I'm the Chief Information Officer for the district. I'm going to talk a little bit. It's just a couple slides. So from the technology side of the house, Richard was mentioning 90% of the technology funding comes from this capital levy. It translates about 25% of the entire amount that we ask in the capital levy renewal. We pay out of here a lot of the devices for the kiddos, the laptops that they use at school, iPads, also the technology for the teachers, workstations in the classrooms. A lot of money comes out of here to we have these major renovation projects on the classrooms, working together with Richard's side of the house and Capital, renovating some of the classrooms that hasn't been retrofitted for a long time. We are looking to put new technology, interactive monitors and screens, to make it more agile for the educators at the classroom. A lot of things that we pay out of here too is the software and hardware. We run a pretty big operation when it comes to providing connectivity and digital resources to 106 schools and the central office. So you're thinking about fiber, switches and servers that run the network that translates to hardware and software. We actually developing an implementation digital curriculum. We did a pilot on the last levy. We invested about $9 million on digital curriculum adoption. And this time around, we apped it up. We proved the concept. It worked well. We see some improvement on academic achievements. So what we're doing is we're investing close to $40 million in curriculum adoption, digital resources. And that's a direct, impact to the kids because that's software in the classroom. Then we're doing some upgrades to digital systems. We have both the academic systems and then we have the business systems. This time around, we're investing pretty heavy on replacing our enterprise resource planning. Our ERP is almost end of life, 20 years old. So we need to replace it. If you guys think about printing W-2s or printing checks or paying vendors or HR I don't know, benefits, processing of new employees, everything, the warehouse, everything goes through that system. It's our major business operation system. So we're upgrading that one. Also, Richard mentioned that we're doing a lot of investments on security. A lot of the security systems that he was talking about, to include the cameras, door locks, and stuff like that, they all ride in our network. So we work together as well on doing these new upgrades to cameras and security systems. And also we're doing a big investment also equity access to digital resources and language support systems. We were lacking of some equipment to help kids, that need the translation equipment. So we are upping all the equipment and solutions that were spread out throughout the whole district. So after doing the analysis, it came out to be about 415. I'll say it's about 25% of the entire capital budget. Capital levy renewal over a period of 3 years. This translates to about 139 FTEs, employees, that provide for all the services, and support. We bucketed in 3 different major areas. The student learning support, and in these areas mainly anything that has to do with the equipment that the kids use, the equipment that is being used at the classroom, the equipment that we use in central. They take care of the repairs, they take care of the staff. They actually at the schools helping when they have a problem at the school. There's a person then to help and support. So that comes out of this money. Also, we have a digital learning team that is embedded. It's actual educators that we pay a little bit of money, and they're the ones that are telling us in the classrooms, it would be nice to have this solution for the classroom. Oh, I need this, and so on and so on. And then we collect those requirements and we bring them for analysis and, make sure that they're feasible. On the second bucket is the actual infrastructure of our network and data systems and servers, licenses. We pay also the telephone service and the internet service out of here. And then all the associated staff that provide for those services. We have a lot of network engineers in this area, specialized equipment. So we use a lot of engineers. And then the final one is the district systems and data. And this is where we have the databases, everything that has to do with business. The ERP is part of this area. Our learning management systems, we have something called Schoology and CSOC. That's where we house our all our academic data, grades, reports, everything is in this system. And then our information systems, student, where we guard all the Privacy Act data, from the students. Let me see, district systems and data. We have also very specialized systems, i.e. the ARP. We can compete with the market when it comes to engineers in those fields. So what we do, we consult that out as well. They're very specialized fields, very expensive. So we consult that out, and that comes out of this funding as well. So what everything costs for this renewal will be 1.8 billion. That includes my technology part of the house and Richard's capital. And it ranges for between 93 cents and 79 cents per thousand of assessed value over a 6-year period. So with that, I'm going to give it back to Dr. Baraman. He's going to talk about the levy rate comparisons.
Thank you, Carlos. Thank you, Richard. Couple more slides and we're anxious to get to your questions. Just some closing information on what this costs a typical taxpayer and how it compares to the current rates. Seattle is fortunate because there's a large commercial real estate community, and so they offset some of these taxes for people like me who are homeowners. Our rates on this levy that Carlos and Richard have talked about, the levy I talked about, and then there's an existing levy called the BTA levy. Those are currently costing taxpayers $1.85 per $1,000 of assessed value annually. And you can see around Puget Sound, that's the lowest rate among the other school districts in Puget Sound, ranging from $4.09 comparably at Highline, less commercial real estate in Highline. So for all of this together, on an annual basis, it's $1.85 per $1,000. These two levies plus the existing levy that's continuing. With his new renewal, with that $1.85, we'd go to $2.12 per $1,000 of assessed value. And that's if the state does lift some of those restrictions, that cap I talked about a little bit earlier. We've done lots of these events. We're happy to be here tonight, and we're happy to entertain some questions. And before we get to questions, I want to just do a couple quick housekeeping things. Thank May, so in case we run out of time, for organizing this event for us. It's been great to be here, and we're anticipating your questions. We have some friends from Schools First, which is the advocacy group that supports the Public Schools levies. They're going to be in the back later if people have questions for them. And there was a third housekeeping item that I'm forgetting. Oh, how many of you are Seattle Public Schools graduates? Are there any in the room? Or kids, or grandkids, or great-grandkids. So nearly everybody in this room is impacted. Former school board members. Peter Mayer is a former school board member. So you know how much this means to kids and to you and your families. So just wanted to share that information. I'll sit over here. And May, are you going to facilitate the questions, or do you want us to do that?
Well, thank you, gentlemen. That was very interesting. Well, now it's your turn, audience. You can ask questions of these three gentlemen. Please keep your questions succinct. No comments, just questions. And I know they're ready to answer them. We've got 3 mic runners, so just raise your hand if you want to ask a question.
If you own a $600,000 home, how much is the tax with this level?
So this is a real test of me trying to do math on the fly. This is assuming an $870,000 assessed value home. These numbers are, so 3/4 of those amounts would be approximately what that would be. So
It's a lot of money. I've got it here, and it's a tremendous amount of money.
Hold the mic up.
You don't have it there?
I don't know.
On a $600,000 home, what's the tax?
So it would be, Richard's
level.
doing it for me here. Divided by 870. 600 divided by 8. I'll do. $1.27 per $1,000 of assessed value annually is what the $600,000 times 600. Yes. Oh, times 600. $764 a year.
Okay.
That's what the current rate is. Yes.
Do we have another question?
Who currently is the person, or what group of persons decide what basic education is? Who is deciding whether we will fund music or we won't?
That's part of the legislative process, so they're the ones that are determining the basic education for those who were in Seattle when the McCleary decision was happening. There was a challenge to their definition of basic education, but the legislature is the group that determines how much funding will go towards that paramount duty of the state to fund basic education. Great questions.
I have a question over here. I have a comment first. If you need any help with your elevator repairs, just let us know. My other question is, does Horizon House pay property taxes? No.
We're hearing no.
So, do we have a moral responsibility not to vote on this issue?
Responsibility to vote.
When my children were little, in the early 70s, we voted for the levies, we campaigned for the levies, we doorbelled for the levies, we went crazy to get the voters out. And when we approached the legislators, and I did that myself, the promise was that eventually, don't worry, the levy will go away, we'll have it as a line item at the legislative level. Well, my children are about to retire, and we're still talking about the levy. What happens if there should be, let's say, a fire, like in Los Angeles, and suddenly you don't have any property to tax? What happens if there's an economic downturn that is so severe that the property owners will not be able to pay? I mean, so much of what you're doing is depending on us paying. But if we go away, so to speak, if this purse goes away, our kids are in trouble. And so are you.
Yeah, great point. It's 20% or 15.6% of the total budget currently for Seattle Public Schools, and I think it's at least that for most school districts across the state. So to your points over here around the responsibility of basic education, that's a great comment and question.
Among our student body, do we have any immigrant children or undocumented children of undocumented individuals, people who might be vulnerable to recent events going on? And is there any policy in the school district about that?
I'm the newest member of the panel at the school district. We have our chief of operations here as well with us, who Fred Podesta probably is the best position to help answer that question.
We do have policies established by the Seattle Public Schools Board of Directors that protect individuals, but guide principals and others if there is any kind of immigration enforcement that's done by any local law agency, how that protects people's rights and is also in accordance with state law. We assume that we do have students who are undocumented or have parents who are undocumented. That is not information we collect. We are not an immigration enforcement agency, so we serve students based on that they live in Seattle and they're entitled to enroll in Seattle, and we have protections in place even with changes at the federal level.
Any more questions? Yes, in the middle.
Well, I wanted to know what percentage of the education are you predicting to be digitized? 100%? 50%? Is there any way to know if the students are actually going to read a physical book?
Hello? Sorry. Yeah, when we actually, the academic side is the one running those systems and how do they want to model it. They're on the early studies, when we did the pilot, we make sure that the books were there. So when we did enter in contracts with some of these digital resources, we made it noted that, okay, you're going to give us the software platform for the kids to do their things and learn, but you're also going to give us the books. They're going to go along with that for the kids that want to. Yes, yes. So we're not switching everything over to digital. Our academics chief, will tell you that. It was just what makes sense with switching over. Yeah.
And then I'll also add, in the capital projects portion, with the new schools that we build, in elementary school, we provide in the neighborhood of 10,000 volumes in the library, and then approximately, I'm going to say, 500 to 1,000 volumes in a classroom. So there's a pretty significant collection of books still in the classroom environment, and then also in the library environment. So.
I can add a little bit more to that. The levy that I've been talking about also is funding sort of what you're talking about, the arts, the drama, the music programs. And so this is not just switching everything to digital curriculum. This is investing in schools in the different ways that students learn currently.
So just to
It's a hot
clarify,
topic.
yeah, no, you got me on my topic. Just to clarify, the technology, the capital money, we cannot be using for operational, what he just talked. So what we have done with switching over to digital curriculum is that we'd release some of the dollars that were being spent in the operational side of the house on books, because now we can pay it with technology money because it's a digital platform, which includes also the books for free. So.
Let's take another question. Did you have one, Laura?
Well, I thought we were running out of time.
No, we're
so
okay.
I wanted to be,
We're
I
okay.
just wanted to clarify the budget for this year, which has the deficit projected, is not going to be affected by the levies. I mean, I think the superintendent gave a talk about the situation yesterday, but I haven't seen any reporting on it. But could you comment on what's happening with the current budget shortfall?
Yes. So for this current school year, there is no shortfall for this year. The budget is balanced. The deficit that you're talking about is for next year and the following years. The impact of this levy is sort of neutral if it's passed. So it's been factored in as if this levy were to pass. So the deficit number that's in the press around this is $94 million. If this levy does not pass, that deficit becomes $191 million more. So back to the math on the fly, $280 million. And so this levy is assumed to pass in the discussion that you're seeing in the media around the Seattle Public Schools deficit. Last night, the superintendent presented some information to the board for consideration on how to bridge that deficit for the next year. And part of that solution, back to the question that we got earlier, was for the legislature to do more towards basic education. And the superintendent's been working, he's been testifying this week on behalf of Seattle Public Schools for adequate funding for school districts across the state, including Seattle.
We have time for one more question.
Is it possible that schools will still be closed?
The board made a definitive decision that no schools will close for next school year, and they have not taken up the discussion as to whether that means for the indefinite future or for any period of time. And so it's possible currently that schools would be closed in the future as enrollment changes and things change in the community, but for next year there won't be any schools closed. But new boards, new members, new situation, new environment. I don't think it's right to say the answer is schools will never be closed, but for next year that's the answer. Great question. Thank you so much for having us. Thank you again, May, for facilitating this. It's been great, and thank you for all for being community members with us.
Okay, thank you. Yes, well, I meant to get up here in time to say better thank you to the speakers. Thank you, speakers, as they're going out the door. But we are concerned about the timing, and I know everybody likes to get to bed early. The second item on your ballot has to do with social housing. 2 years ago, voters approved an initiative that created a social housing developer in Seattle. That's also called something that's a public development authority. It's a government-owned corporation. and we have lots of those in Seattle. What is going to be on your ballot is a question about which of two funding sources you would approve, and the other question is, do you approve either of them? I mean, you have to say first, do you want any funding, yes or no, and then you're asked to decide which of these two funding sources you prefer. And the video we're going to show was prepared by the Seattle channel, and I think it gives you a good picture. It's a half-hour video of what the ballot issue is about, and then spokespeople for 3 different points of view. Prop 1A, which is the one proposal, Prop 1B, which is another, and then the question about whether you want funding provided by the city at all. So it's complicated, and what I'm thinking is anybody, since we don't have time to discuss it here, if anybody's interested in talking more about this issue and the video, I'll be in the Fireside Lounge afterwards, and we can talk about it. But Nick is going to show us the video now.
Seattle voters, listen up. This February, the future of social housing is at stake as you consider whether to support Proposition 1A or 1B in a special election.
One of the biggest questions people have is, how will social housing be paid for?
After voting to create a social housing developer in 2023, Seattleites must now decide on a funding plan, Proposition 1A or 1B.
Let's tax wealthy businesses to fund social housing.
Proposition 1A would create a new payroll tax on workers making more than $1 million a year.
We need to see results first.
Last year, the Seattle City Council created a competing plan, Proposition 1B, that would use the city's existing Jumpstart payroll tax instead.
This alternative robs Peter to pay Paul.
And in case you like neither, voters can also reject both proposals and send the developer back to the drawing board.
Let's hold off on the money for now and come back and look at it later.
To help keep social housing alive, which funding plan should you support? Hear from both sides.
We want to go big and we want to go bold.
We're saying yes on 1B because we think it is the more responsible way.
Building the case for a sustainable social housing future. Next on City Inside Out. Welcome to this edition of City Inside Out. I'm your host, Brian Callanan. Seattleites have a complex choice to make this February when it comes to the future of a new type of affordable housing. It's called social housing, and city voters approved it 2 years ago to build units for people of mixed incomes so that those paying higher rents help subsidize units for those paying lower rents. But funding the social housing developer has turned into a political battle, leading to a multi-part question for voters to consider with Prop 1A and 1B. 2 years ago, 57% of Seattle voters said yes to I-135 to establish a social housing developer. State law forbids having two subjects in the same initiative, so the measure did not include a choice on how to pay for the affordable housing program. So, social housing advocates successfully gathered signatures last year to put a funding measure, I-137, on the ballot. 137 would create an excess payroll compensation tax, so employers would pay 5% on any income given to a worker that's above $1 million a year. For a worker making $1.2 million, an employer would be taxed $10,000. But after reviewing 137, the Seattle City Council drafted a competing funding plan. A majority of the council wants to pay for social housing using money from Seattle's existing payroll expense tax, or Jumpstart, administered by the Office of Housing. Council sponsors say they don't want to give a blank check to a new public agency, but opponents say the alternate proposal takes away from housing providers who currently depend on the payroll tax. Opponents also say the council's plan would generate only 1/5 the revenue of the compensation tax model and would sunset after 5 years. So here's what's on your ballot. Question 1 asks, should either of these measures be enacted into law? A majority no vote will send the social housing developer back to the drawing board for a funding plan. Question 2 asks, regardless of your first vote, which plan do you prefer? 1A, the new excess compensation tax proposed by social housing advocates, or 1B, the council's proposal to use existing payroll taxes. It's a 2-part proposition with some major consequences, and ballots are due February 11th. Thanks again to everyone for joining us on City Inside Out. I'm Brian Callanan, and I'm glad to be with you and break down what's on your ballot here with social housing. We have with us to explain this Tiffany McCoy, Co-Executive Director of Policy and Advocacy for the group House Our Neighbors. She is speaking in favor of Prop 1A. Tiffany, good to see you again.
Thanks for having me.
We also have with us Rachel Smith, President and CEO of the Seattle Metropolitan Chamber of Commerce, supporting Prop 1B. Rachel, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
We also have with us Roger Valdez, Director of Seattle for Growth, who opposes both of these measures. Roger, good to have you back.
Thank you.
All right, let's jump in if I could. Opening statements. Let's do this thing. Keep them to about a minute. Tiffany, why should voters support Prop 1A?
Yeah, and thanks for having us again, Brian. Good to see you. Yeah, we're back, as promised, from Initiative 135, which voters passed by a 14-point margin with the funding mechanism that we were unable to do with I-135. We are super grateful that the social housing developer has hired a CEO, Roberto Jimenez, who comes with a wealth of experience from California. And the Seattle Social Housing Developer is now also a member of the Housing Development Consortium in meeting with a lot of our low-income housing providers. So we see tremendous support within them. And I'll say, too, at a state level and a local legislative level, we're really thankful to have the support of Representatives Chop, Representative Macri, Representative Reed and Farivar and Scott, and Senator Saldana and Hasegawa. So while my opponents will talk about how there's not a concrete plan, what we can see is that there's tremendous support. There's belief in the model. This model is not something that is unique to only Montgomery County, Maryland, or to Chattanooga, Tennessee. It's something that can happen here and something that voters want to have happen. So we're grateful to be here, looking forward to diving in on why we need a new revenue source to address our housing crisis.
Thank you very much for that. Rachel, why should people support Prop 1B?
Well, thanks again for having us. And I want to say, for starters, quickly why the Seattle Metro Chamber is here today. We are champions of building more housing. We advocate for pro-housing policy. We worked on the campaign to pass the Seattle Housing Levy, and we sit in a coalition actually with House Our Neighbors to get the right outcomes in the comprehensive plan. And we're here today not to debate the merits of social housing, but to advocate for why 1B is the right way to invest in this new approach. Now, we're all here today because we are all advocates and have strong opinions, but I'm going to focus on the facts, what we know for certain today, which is, one, the social housing PDA is not ready for prime time. They have one single staff person, a lack of transparency with the public, and 1B provides accountability.
As the Public Development Authority, keep going.
Thank you. 2, 1B will focus the use of public money towards lower income people where it should go. And 3, there's absolutely no plan for the PDA and what they would actually deliver. And what the proponents for 1A are saying is at best hopeful in what they will be able to accomplish, but there's really no guarantee. And 1B ensures that they will deliver before we give them hundreds of millions, even billions of dollars.
Okay, thanks for that. Roger, tell us why you think voters should oppose both of these measures.
Well, Seattle's housing affordability problem, we don't need more money, we need more housing. And the Seattle City Council has spent about $1 billion over the last 10 years trying to solve this problem with no effect. And that's why we're still debating another ballot measure with more money. But it's ironic to hear the chamber and the council calling their group unprofessional when it was the chamber and the council that created mandatory housing affordability, which was a tax on all new housing. They told us in 2015 we'd have 20,000 units of housing by 2025. Where are those units? They've done about 1,000 for about $300 million. And so it's just funny to hear Rachel talking about how expert the council is when they have spent billions of dollars and hundreds of millions of dollars with absolutely no effect. on this problem. So, and then they came back and said, well, spend another $1 billion on a housing levy collected over 7 years. So the council doesn't have a track record of being professional or effective in doing anything on housing. So I say vote no, vote once, vote no. Don't vote on the other two. And let's hold these folks accountable at the council and the chamber for the mess they've made of this problem.
Okay, I want to engage with that if I can. And Rachel, it feels like there might be some interaction to have here if I could. I know that the chamber has been critical of social housing, but supports 1B. And I wanted to go down this path, especially if voters say no with that first question here. What happens? That's an important part of this.
Yeah, so one thing, I don't think I said some of that, Roger, but two, we are not opposing social housing. Okay. We are saying yes on 1B because we think it is the more responsible way. I've been a part of doing a lot of big things in this region, whether it's Sound Transit 2 or 3, the waterfront, health through housing, and I think we can and should try new things, but I think we want to do that in a way that is responsible, accountable to the public, and in a way that will ensure that the agency in charge is delivering.
Okay. Is there anything else you wanted to respond to? I know Roger had some other.
It's not what you said. It's when we talk about accountability, there hasn't been for 10 years. The chamber has supported all these council measures that have spent $1 billion, and we still have the problem's getting worse.
Okay. All right. I'm gonna keep it at that for a minute, just so I can cover some ground here, because Tiffany, I do want to help voters get through this. Yeah. It's this double shot of questions here that can get a little confusing. If voters say no to both of these measures, which is this option in that first question, will social housing be able to survive? What goes on there?
I do. I have full faith that social housing will survive, not just because voters have overwhelmingly supported it, not also the fact that we've gathered over 38,000 signatures and are in the midst of like the height of our GOTV campaign to talk to voters about this. Voters are desperate for solutions. They're desperate for bold solutions. Also, I have full faith in the CEO, Roberto Jimenez, to deliver, to find private funds while we work on another ballot initiative. Because let's be clear, we are committed. House Our Neighbors as an organization is committed to this model. And while the chamber says that we're not here to debate the merits of social housing or that they totally agree with social housing, I question that when they only want to direct capital investments to the lowest income, when that is antithetical to the model of social housing. So a vote for 1B is actually a vote against social housing. And if people want to see the mandates that voters asked for in I-135, they'll vote yes on 1 and on 1A.
Okay, please.
I was going to say, that is certainly not true. Using public dollars for the people who need it the most is the way that we should spend public dollars, and we fully support that. And the PDA during 135, or excuse me, not the PDA, House Our Neighbors, during 135 said there were a lot of tools that the organization would use to generate revenue and capital, but a new tax was not one of them. In fact, they said there would be no government subsidy necessary. So while that is a little bit of a bait and switch from my opinion, I think the biggest problem here is that the PDA is not ready. They have a single staff person. They barely just got a website up. They have not complied with Open Public Meetings Act and the Public Records Act. This is not an organization that is going to be ready in 365 days to spend $50 million a year every single year forever.
Yeah, Tiffany, this is the criticism I've heard about 1A and social housing, I guess in general, this idea of handing over a blank check to a new agency that doesn't have a lot of experience. Can you talk about a little bit about what Rachel brought up there,
Definitely,
please?
And I also encourage viewers and voters to go back and read all of the media coverage around I-135. It was incredibly clear and explicit. We talked about it here, Brian, when I was here for I-135, that we were going to come back with the funding mechanism. So just encourage voters to do that reading and research on their own. And then as for the criticism of a blank check, I guess it's a question of whether or not you trust that a startup organization with an incredibly trustworthy CEO is able to launch effectively. I mean, Sharon Lee yesterday when we were talking to the Seattle Times Ed Board talked about how Lehigh started as a one-person agency.
Low-income housing institute.
Sorry, yes, thank you. The Low-Income Housing Institute started with just her and donated Apple laptop and a volunteer. All agencies need to start from somewhere. And then as for the Open Public Meetings Act, I'll just say you can go to the website today. All all of the meeting minutes from their first meeting in May in 2023 are available there.
Okay. I want to make sure I bring Roger into the mix because there was one piece here that you brought up with regard to this measure and how it's going to go forward, Tiffany, and it looks like this, Roger. I want to make sure that I bring to the fore that voters did approve social housing 2 years ago here in Seattle, 57% of the vote, but at the time they could not choose a funding source because there's the state's single subject rule on ballot measures. So just to be clear, are you opposed to social housing or just these funding options in 1A and 1B?
Well, I have a lot of respect for what the PDA did. I mean, the council and the chamber and the mayor have been a clown car when it comes to housing over the last decade. They've utterly failed. And I think that what your group did was out of frustration, saying these people don't know what they're doing, and they don't. So I respect the fact that they got it on the ballot, they got approval, they went out and made their case, and the people said yes. I think the problem is no more money right now until we go back and look at the mess that we've made and all the money that's been set on fire. You know, the chamber came out and said, let's support another $1 billion, and now we're doing $52 million. So let's stop. The voters should say enough's enough. Let's go back and look at what we've done. And then, you know, I have no problem with the idea of subsidizing lower rent people with higher rent people. But we have a program, the multifamily tax exemption, which created 6,600 units that way. So, you know, I would, and I said this the last time, I would like to work with the PDA to figure out what's the right strategy to use bonding capacity, city-owned land to develop. I wanted to work with Councilmember Salwan on that.
Yeah.
So there's ways that we can do this and end run the bottleneck at the council and at the chamber and the DSA. All groups that have utterly failed. So I respect that part of it, but let's hold off on the money for now and come back and look at it later.
Okay. I want to make sure that I engage some of the differences between 1A and 1B. Thank you for those different points there. And Rachel, let me jump in with you here because one criticism of the 1B option is that it doesn't do enough. It only provides 1/5 of the funding for housing that the 1A option would provide, and it also puts social housing in a position it never wanted to be in, taking money away from other providers potentially by using the city's existing Jumpstart payroll tax dollars. I want to make sure you respond to that, please.
Yeah, well, I don't exactly agree with that characterization because the money under 1B still goes to low-income housing.
Okay.
It's capped at 80% AMI, which of course under 1A it is not.
Right.
It can be used for any housing, including people making 120% of area median income. So that is one of the reasons we're supporting 1B is to you know, again, use the money for those who need it most. And, you know, because the PDA is not in a state of readiness to, and has no plan for delivering housing, we think that using an approach that gives them the opportunity to pilot this project, but also pilot this kind of housing, but also comes with a lot of accountability through the Office of Housing and through other kinds of requirements, like, for example, having a CFO is a requirement and also a good idea. And so, and it doesn't mean that it doesn't preclude them from getting money in the future. And again, if no government subsidies were necessary, which is what was said originally, this is, I think, the responsible way to pilot this project.
Okay. I feel like there's a few different points there. Tiffany, would you like to respond to what Rachel said?
Yeah, I'll say like we do not need another low-income housing provider. 1B is duplicating efforts, which is like what Roger and others from the anti-I-135 effort said from the beginning. This is just duplicative, and 1B is duplicating low-income housing providers. We don't need any more. We have tremendous low-income housing providers doing what they need. They need the money for that. And I also want to say that I take issue with this money, of public money not going to all Seattleites. So if I make over 80% of the area median income, so when my house is on fire, am I not allowed to call the fire department because I don't pass the means testing? I make too much for those public services. Or should my kid not be able to go to kindergarten in West Seattle? Or should we not be able to drive on the road or be able to call the police department if needed? This idea that like only public dollars should go to those in most need, I disagree with wholeheartedly. And I also say that we should be viewing housing more as a public good as opposed to a commodity, which is part of the crux of the problem for why we're in the housing crisis we're in.
Let me push back a little bit, though, because with the social housing model, as you know, and you've talked about this with me, it's helping people at a number of different ranges when it comes to area median income, the AMI there, all the way up to potentially 120%, which is well over $100,000 for a one-person family, if you want to look at it that way. Why does that person need social housing? Can you break down that piece with me? Because I think some people have questions about that.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And I would say I would point to like the mass displacement of people in Seattle who make Seattle great. Artists, architects, educators. One of the superintendent of Seattle Public Schools said at a school board meeting recently, one of the reasons that they're seeing a decline in enrollment, there's still a good birth rate in Seattle, but once kids start entering kindergarten, there's a drop in enrollment. There's a drop in that population. And the superintendent said that's due to one of the reasons, and I don't want to make this an absolute, is the housing crisis. People can't afford to live here. They can't afford to grow their family and live in the city of Seattle. So if we care about making sure that bus drivers, that educators, that nurses, that doctors even can afford to live in the city in which they help operate, social housing is critical. And I will also say, to make this abundantly clear, the investment that Prop 1A would invest in is the capital, is buying the building for the use of the public good. Those people who make 120% will be subsidizing with their rent, those at the lower income, and the investment that goes into that building, they will help to pay that off.
After they've been subsidized by the government. And I simply disagree that Seattle's government should be subsidizing housing for people making over $100,000 when there are a lot of people making less than that really, really need it.
Mm-hmm. And I think that was an important part of 1B, setting this AMI level at 80%. Can you talk about some of the reasons behind that, why it was structured in that way?
I think it's because every single housing study in our region has said that we need to focus our public dollars, our public subsidies to people who need it most. I mean, that is the housing that we need in this region, and people who can afford it should.
I see some head shaking over there.
Every time I come on and do this thing, I just hate so much what the council and the chamber have done that I find myself like in these conversations, I end up advocating for the PDA. Even though I don't think we needed it because we already have PDAs. There's a number of PDAs, but this idea of what we're subsidizing in, the chamber and the council have supported massive spending on LIHTC, low-income housing tax credits. These units cost like $600,000 a unit. And therefore, guess what? 60 to 80% of people at area median income. These are disastrous uses of resources. At Magnuson, Frank Chop supported this renovation of this historic project.
Former House Speaker,
yeah, $600,000 a unit. And so the idea that, we're worried about who we're subsidizing is baloney. The fact is that they already are subsidizing a tremendous amount of waste. And so what we need to do is maybe repurpose the PDA for something like cooperative housing ownership, looking at community land trusts. I mean, these are things we're doing in New Mexico right now in another project I'm working on where we're trying to break the back of that tax credit monster and the garbage that comes out of local government that subsidizes things with very little effect, produces 60 or 80 unit projects. And no one can get into those because it's for people that have jobs. We're not talking about 120 or 30. We're talking at 60 or 80, where the market should be able to produce it if we didn't have things like MHA, taxes on housing that weigh production down.
Thank you. I want to make sure we bring it back.
One thing. I mean, I'm really proud of our work on the affordable housing levy. I'm really proud that we support helping people get into housing and of policies like MFTE and the missing middle bill. And so, Roger, I appreciate your criticisms, but I just want to make sure that everybody knows we're really proud of that work.
Well, are you going to stand up to the council's efforts to ruin the MFTE by messing with income levels? I mean,
that's what we're here for today.
But I mean, it's relevant. Simply because there's other tools out there that are being ruined by council action, and we need to look at those other options and save those.
Thank you. I want to make sure we bring it back to what's on the ballot here, if I could. Tiffany, maybe I can try this with you. If 1A passes, what happens? If 1B passes, what happens? Can you go down that path with me?
Well, I have full faith in the model of social housing and the fact that it serves incomes across the income spectrum. Again, seeing housing as a public good, not as a commodity. While the chamber continues to say that they support social housing, they don't support the model of social housing if they only think social housing should serve those that are 80% and below, which is duplicating what we're already doing. So I think that the social housing developer will survive regardless. I guess the question for voters is, do we want to keep doing the Seattle process with all new big ideas? I can only think of what we do with RV safe lots, where we invest in often for one lot and it serves 12 people. And then after a couple years, it's this doesn't work. And it's well, that's right, it doesn't work because you're serving a drop in the bucket of the entire population. So we want to go big and we want to go bold. We're in the middle of a housing crisis, and sometimes in conversations like this, it's kind of we're forgetting what's happening out there in the streets, the fact that small businesses are closing, union workers are having to go further and further. We're losing staff in our schools. We're losing people coming to the UW for learning how to be a nurse or a doctor. So that's what we want to address in Prop 1A. It also funds public use of social housing, and 1B does not. So that's why we want to have 1A go forward.
Can I take you down this path too, Rachel? If 1A passes, if 1B passes, what do you got?
Yeah, I mean, I do want to say that, again, House Our Neighbors told the voters they would use bonding, capital grants, loans, and other means to pay for social housing. So if there's a need for money, they should try one of the ones that they told the voters to fund housing for people making over 80% AMI. And, you know, again, I actually agree with Roger on one point, which is that we need to do a combination of things to get more housing. We need zoning changes, regulatory reform, and public subsidy. And I think, you know, the reality is 1B is the more responsible choice, and that is because the PDA has no plan. Saying that the PDA will, with certainty, do anything specific is not based on anything the organization has produced. They could buy existing housing, they could build new housing, or both. They could build lots of units of affordable housing, they could build some, they could build none. And these hypothetical examples are, they're great hypothetical examples, but they've changed over time. They're confusing voters, and I think 1B is the more responsible way to go.
Got it. And we're going down the path I'd like to go, which is a closing statement here. And Tiffany, if you could, closing statement to voters out there about Prop 1A. What do you want them to know?
Yeah, I'll say it's a question of whether or not we think that the status quo is working, because what I hear from the opposition is, let's just stick with what we're doing, and hopefully, I don't know, something from the federal government will come down and bless us, but we know that Trump is about to take office. It is likely that the Housing and Urban Development Department will face significant cuts. We can't keep depending on the federal government to serve the lowest income. What we see with the social housing model in Montgomery County, Maryland, is that it is able to produce more low-income units with the cross-subsidy model that we are advocating for than they would if they just relied on the federal government. So why are we arguing against the ability to add more low-income units in addition to our affordable housing partners and just stick with the status quo? So I would ask people, be bold, be visionary, support something that is not unique to Seattle, that works, and make sure that we're actually addressing this housing crisis at scale.
Thank you. Rachel, some final thoughts on 1B, please.
Yeah, I would just say on Montgomery County, it actually uses their version of SHA, not a new PDA. It requires at least a quarter of the units be 50% AMI or below, not the proposals that we've seen from House Our Neighbors. And this PDA has a bunch of well-intentioned but very costly requirements around it. So bottom line, if you really support social housing, really want it to succeed, then you should vote for 1B. It provides a reasonable amount of money that they can actually get out the door, the support and the accountability of the Office of Housing, and it makes sure that the affordable units get funded.
Thank you very much. Roger, some final thoughts here on how voters should approach this issue.
So we know how to solve housing affordability. We need to reduce red tape and regulation, allow people to build all kinds of housing in all neighborhoods for people of every level of income. Do we need publicly funded affordable housing? Absolutely we do, but let's be smart about it, allowing private builders to build as much as they can, and then provide cash subsidies for people that are struggling to pay the rent, and then supportive built solutions for people that are really the hardest hit. It's okay, voters, to vote no on you're not anti-progressive or pro-Trump if you vote this down. What it will send a message to everyone is, we're tired of seeing money set on fire and not seeing a solution to the problem. So that's why we're saying, you know, we've got plenty of money. Let's use it wisely. Vote once, vote no, and let's hold these folks accountable and start over again.
Okay, thank you all for your input, and we will be right back. What are people saying online about Prop 1A and 1B? One person writes, "We have already passed the framework for this initiative. Now is the time to act, to tax wealthy corporations to fund social housing." Another person writes, "The social housing PDA was formed terribly and is doomed for failure, or wasting a lot of money, or maybe both." We'd like to know what you think. Email us at contact@seattlechannel.org or find us on social media. Good to have that input, and thank you all for your input as well. We will see you next time on City Inside Out.
I would like to thank Risa and Nick for your technical expertise. We couldn't have done it without you. I want to thank all of you for coming, and those of you watching at home, thank you for joining us. Before you leave, I have one more thing. I'd like to introduce our new election forum chair, Tim Bradbury. We are very delighted to welcome you, Tim. And he's going to say just a few words.
Just a few words. If it takes me more than 2 minutes, you can start throwing things at me. First and foremost, May and Laura and Sandy, thank you for your leadership in bringing tonight together. There was a pause in the leadership of the committee, and we weren't ready for this. And they stepped up and made it happen. So let's give them a round of applause. Thank you, thank you, thank you. All right. And we are really open to new members for the Election Forum Committee. If you want to talk about doing that, or if you know you want to just plain join, talk to me. I'm in 7D, and my extension is 2698, Tim Bradbury. And thank you for coming. It's great to have this debate tonight.